Jimmy Dimora's walking to federal court today. His last taste of freedom for a while. He's now in federal custody after being found guilty on all but one count in his corruption trial. Good evening, everyone. I'm Leon Bibb.
And I'm Danita Harris. Lee Jordan has the night off. Dimora is guilty on 33 counts, including the biggest one, racketeering, which means he ran Cuyahoga County government for his own personal gain. We have team coverage tonight from Chief Investigator Ron Regan, Paul Kiska, who was in the courtroom for the verdict, and Kristen Byrne with reaction from county residents.
So let's begin with Ron Regan. Ron, this caps a federal investigation that led to more than 50 convictions.
Well, Leon, it was 3.5 years ago when the FBI first raided Jimmy Dimora's home and office. And throughout that entire time period, Dimora has consistently insisted he was innocent of all charges.
And I really believe that I've done nothing wrong. The audits have shown that. Taxpayers have not at $1 had any loss of money from any decision that I made with regard to any awards of any business in county government since I've been a commissioner. It's a whole lot of people that got in trouble, that made up lies, that were cut deals with the federal government for less jail time, and there was nothing done where any contracts were steered or any bid rigging done on my part.
It's all a conspiracy, and we're going to ask for a federal investigation by the Attorney General and the Congress.
And perhaps his most famous denial of all was the day Jimmy Dimora came out and said about himself that he was no angel, but he's not a crook. Well, News Channel 5's reporter Paul Kiska was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. And what was the reaction, Paul?
Well, Ron, at first not much reaction as federal judge Sarah Leoy read each guilty verdict. At first, Jimmy Dimora tried to remain stoic, showing little or no emotion, but as the guilty verdicts added up, he started to slump in his chair. You could noticeably see his shoulders slump. When all the guilty verdicts were read, Jimmy Dimora glanced over, looked directly at the jury for about 5 seconds, then he looked back at his wife Lori, who was seated in the courtroom with their son Anthony. Then at that point, Jimmy Dimora's attorney Bill Whitaker got up and asked the judge if Jimmy Dimora and Michael Gabor could go home until sentencing because this wasn't a violent crime after all, he said. Judge Sarah Leoy denied that request, saying they were a flight risk, and on the spot she demanded that U.S. Marshals handcuff and detain Jimmy Dimora and Michael Gabor. They seemed shocked by that. You got the impression they were hopeful. They felt they could go home tonight, kind of regroup, and come back and face their sentence. At that point, while U.S. Marshals were placing the handcuffs on Jimmy Dimora and Michael Gabor, you could hear the handcuffs clicking. Jimmy Dimora looked at his wife and his son. He smiled for a second, then he blew them a kiss. At that point, as he was led out of the courtroom and handcuffed by the U.S. Marshals, Lori Dimora, his wife, broke down sobbing in tears, and then she was consoled by her son, Anthony. Later, you see her now leaving the federal courthouse. She went out to a waiting SUV to go home to a house she could now possibly lose to the U.S. government as the forfeiture case continues on Tuesday. She could lose that house, other property, other finances, because of Jimmy Dimora's criminal enterprise that he is now convicted of running. Ron, it was a dramatic, emotional day in the courtroom here after 65 days ago when this trial started.
Well, it certainly was, Paul. And I think, Leon, it's probably fair to say, too, that Jimmy Dimora wound up convicting himself in his own words on all of those FBI wiretaps, Leon.
Certainly has been a fall from grace for Jimmy Dimora. Ron, let me ask you, what's ahead now in this case?
Well, on Tuesday, Dimora will be back in court in what's called a forfeiture hearing, and very simply put, that means that the government will try to recoup the value, the cash value of all of the bribes that Dimora took in this case, tens of thousands of dollars worth of home improvements and so on, Leon.
Well, there was a crime, now there is time. Ron, what about sentencing? When do we know when that will take place?
Well, as soon as the forfeiture hearing is over, there should be a sentencing date set, and most likely that would occur within the next probably 3 to 4 weeks. Reporting live at the Federal Building in Akron, I'm Chief Investigator Ron Regan.
Many thanks for your work today, Ron Regan and Paul Kiska.